Letters from the Lighthouse, a Sapphic sleep tale. You're safe now. Let the sound of the sea carry you into this story and breathe. When I first saw the cottage, I almost turned the car around. It looked nothing like the pictures the agent had sent. Smaller, more weather-worn, its white paint dulled by salt and time. The wind pushed at me as I stepped out, tugging my hair loose, carrying the sharp scent of seaweed and rain. For a moment, I simply stood there, breathing it in, the scent of endings and beginnings woven together. I hadn't planned on being here. The cottage belonged to my grandmother, who had passed 3 months earlier, leaving it to me with a short note written in her looping script, for when you need somewhere quiet. At the time, I didn't understand what she meant. But after the breakup, the sleepless nights, and the city that wouldn't stop humming, quiet was the only thing I wanted. The road here had narrowed to a single lane that curved between cliffs and heather, ending with a land surrendered to the sea. Now, standing in front of the cottage, I could hear the faint pulse of waves below, steady, unhurried, ancient. It was as if the world itself was telling me to slow down. Inside, the air smelled faintly of salt and lavender. The furniture was old but lovingly kept. A faded sofa, a knitted throw, shelves of mismatched cups. In one corner, a small wood burner crouched beneath a crooked chimney. And above everything, the rhythmic whisper of rain on the roof. I unpacked slowly, more out of ritual than need, folding sweaters, stacking books, placing my grandmother's photograph on the mantel. She was younger in that picture, hair pinned neatly, eyes bright with something I'd never thought to ask her about. Looking at her now, I felt a tug of regret. There had always been a part of her that seemed distant, as if she carried a secret tide within her that no one could reach. That night, I made tea and sat by the small window overlooking the sea. Dark clouds pressed low against the horizon, and the lighthouse beam swept across the water in slow, patient arcs. Every few seconds the light touched the cottage, a brief pulse of gold, before moving on. I watched it until my eyes blurred, the rhythm matching the waves, the soft rain, the beating of my heart. Sleep came easily at first. Then the dreams began. Half-remembered sounds of laughter carried on wind, the echo of a woman's voice calling from the cliffs. When I woke, the rain had stopped, but the air still felt heavy with something unsaid. I wandered the cottage barefoot, tracing the uneven floorboards. Morning light spilled through thin curtains, dust floating like pale confetti. In the kitchen, I found a kettle older than I was, a row of teacups, and behind them, a narrow door I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked beside the pantry, its handle rusted, paint peeling. When I tried it, it stuck, then gave with a reluctant sigh. Beyond lay a small storage room lined with shelves. Most were empty, save for a few forgotten jars and a stack of yellowed newspapers. But near the back, on a low shelf, sat a wooden box. It was simple, carved from driftwood, the surface smoothed by age and touch. My name was written faintly across the lid in pencil. A chill rippled through me. I hadn't been here since I was a child. How could something already have my name on it? I knelt, fingers trembling slightly, and opened the box. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, tied with a ribbon the color of sea glass. The paper was fragile, edges curled and soft, but each one was sealed with a wax stamp in the shape of a lighthouse. For a long moment, I just stared, listening to the quiet hum of the waves beyond the walls. Then I lifted the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, looping, unmistakably feminine. Across the front, a single word: for her. I should have waited, maybe brewed another cup of tea, maybe sat by the window again. But the room seemed to hold its breath, and I couldn't help myself. I broke the seal. My dearest, if you are reading this, then perhaps the sea has carried my words further than I ever dreamed. The rest blurred as I read. The letter spoke of longing, of nights spent by the lighthouse, waiting for someone who never came. It spoke of love hidden in plain sight, of a promise made in whispers and broken by silence. The name signed at the end wasn't my grandmother's, but I recognized the address written faintly at the top. It was this very cottage. I set the letter down, heart beating faster than the calm rhythm outside. The air felt charged, the same way it does before a storm. Quiet, heavy, expectant. Who was she writing to? And why had my name then on the box? Outside, the lighthouse beam passed over the window again, lighting the room for an instant. The paper glowed pale gold beneath its sweep, as if answering a call across time. I didn't realize I was smiling until I felt the curve of it on my lips. Something had shifted in the air, a thread pulling me gently forward toward the rest of the letters waiting in the box. And though I couldn't have said why, I felt it then. I wasn't alone here. I spent the morning trying to ignore the box. It sat on the small dining table near the window, ribbon untied now, the first letter still open beside it, like an invitation I hadn't answered. The sea outside was calm, a pewter mirror under a pale sky. Seagulls drifted over the cliffs, their cries sharp and lonely. I made coffee, swept the floor, unpacked the last of my things. Every small task, a way to keep from thinking about what waited there. But every time I looked up, my eyes found it again. The faded wood, the soft green ribbon, the curve of handwriting on the envelopes. It wasn't just curiosity, it was recognition. Something in that letter's voice had felt strangely familiar, as if I'd heard it once before, long ago, in the tone of my grandmother's laughter, or the way she lingered by the radio when old songs played. By afternoon, the clouds rolled in again. The sea turned darker, restless. And the rain returned. First a whisper, then a steady rhythm that filled the silence between thoughts. I lit the wood burner, its faint crackle mingling with the hiss of the rain, and sat by the window with the box beside me. The next envelope was dated 1952. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. "My love," it began. "The lighthouse light reached my window tonight. It reminded me of the way you once held a candle between us so that we could see each other's faces, even when we couldn't be seen by the world." I stopped reading for a moment, pressing my thumb gently over that sentence. Even in faded ink, it felt alive. "They think you've gone to the city," the letter continued, "but I know better. The sea keeps secrets, and so will I." The letter ended simply, "Until the light turns again, yours always, E." The initials struck me like a wave. My grandmother's name had been Eleanor, but she had been the recipient of the letter, not its writer. This E must have been someone else, someone who had loved her. I leaned back to the chair, creaking softly, and let the rain fill the room. It wasn't scandal or shock that I felt, just wonder. It was as if a quiet door had opened in my understanding of who she had been. All the summers I'd spent here as a child, she'd tell stories about the sea, about the lighthouse keepers, about a woman who used to sing on the cliffs. I had never thought to ask if any of those stories were hers. That night, I cooked something simple. Pasta, olive oil, a handful of herbs from a pot by the door, and ate while watching the light sweep across the waves. Each time it reached the cottage, it seemed to pause a heartbeat longer. I imagined the woman who wrote those letters standing by the lighthouse decades ago, looking toward this very window, waiting. Before bed, I tucked the letters back into the box and set it on the nightstand. Outside, the storm gathered again, wind howling against the shutters, rain racing down the glass. I lay there, listening, heart heavy, but not with sadness, more like anticipation. It felt as though the sea itself was whispering that there was more to learn. Sometime in the night, a sound woke me. Not the storm. It had quieted, but something softer. A hum, almost like singing. I slipped from bed and went to the window. The moon was hidden, but the lighthouse beam carved long paths of gold across the water. At its base, through the mist, I thought I saw movement. A shadow on the rocks. A figure, the coat, hair blown by wind. I blinked, and it was gone. When the light swept back, the rocks were empty again. Only the sea moved, rising and falling, patient as breathing. I stayed there for a long time, until the chill crept into my fingers. Then I whispered to the darkness, not sure who I was speaking to. "I'll read the rest tomorrow." And though there was no answer, I could have sworn the waves softened, as if they'd heard me. The rain kept on through the night, but by morning it had softened into a silver mist. The air smelled of salt and damp earth, and the world outside the window felt half awake. the sea and sky blending together. I made coffee and stood at the sink, watching a fishing boat move slowly across the horizon. It was the kind of quiet that fills you up rather than empties you. Not silence, exactly, but the kind of stillness that listens back. I couldn't stop thinking about the woman who'd written those letters. Her words had a rhythm, a patience, the kind of voice that lives on the edge of waiting. Who had she been? What had she and my grandmother risked to love each other in a world that would not have forgiven them for it? The questions pressed at me until I set the mug down and crossed to the table again. The box was where I'd left it, glimmering faintly in the soft morning light. I untied the ribbon and lifted another envelope. The wax seal cracked softly under my thumb. Today, the gulls circled low over the cliffs. It felt like a sign that you were near, even if only in thought. The letter spoke of summer days spent walking to the lighthouse, of evenings painting the sea as it changed color with the wind. It described a dress of blue linen, a garden of rosemary and sage, laughter echoing through the rooms of the cottage. And then, near the end, I am proud of you, my love. Proud that you chose to live as you are, not as they wished you to be. One day, I hope the world will be kinder. I ran my fingers over those last words again and again. It was like touching a pulse that still beat beneath the paper. Outside, the tide was coming in. The sound waves deepened, filling the cottage like breath. I wrapped a scarf around my shoulders and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp against my skin, but the sky had cleared into a luminous gray, and the path to the lighthouse wound ahead between wild grass and heather. The walk was shorter than I remembered from childhood. Every few steps the sea appeared between the cliffs, flashes of silver light, the curve of foam where the water met the rocks. When I reached the lighthouse, I stopped and let my hand rest against the rough stone. The door was locked, but the sound of the sea seemed to echo inside it, deep and resonant. I closed my eyes and pictured her, Eve, standing there decades ago, coat billowing, hair caught in the wind, waiting. Maybe this was where she had written those letters, or where she'd watched for the beam of light that meant my grandmother was near. The thought filled me with an ache I couldn't quite name. Not sadness, not joy, but something tender that lived between them. On the way back, I stopped by the small village shop for bread. The woman behind the counter looked to be around my age, perhaps a little older, with rain-dark hair and a gentle smile. "New at the cottage?" she asked, handing me a loaf still warm from the oven. I nodded. "It's a good place," she said. "Keeps its secrets, but only for those who don't listen." Her words caught me off guard. When I looked up, she was already busying herself behind the counter again, humming softly. I carried the bread home, her voice echoing in my mind like the sea against the rocks. Back inside, I lit the fire and sat once more at the window. Evening was settling, and the light outside had turned the color of old gold. The lighthouse beam began its steady arc again, over sea, over land, over me. I took out another letter. This one was shorter, written in hurried ink. "They say I must leave for London.
Work, they call it. But all I can think of is the way your hand fit inside mine. No date, no signature. Just that. A single confession, as fragile as the paper it was written on. I felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from the sheer humanness of it. The simple, stubborn hope of love that tries to outlast distance and time. The sea outside grew darker. Somewhere in its rhythm, I thought I heard a heartbeat. Maybe it was mine. I didn't open another letter that night. Instead, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you," though I wasn't sure to whom. The sea, the past, or the woman who had loved so fiercely that her words still reach me now. And when I finally went to bed, I dreamed not of storms, but of light.
The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of brittle winter sunlight that makes every raindrop gleam like glass. The sea was calm again, slow waves brushing the rocks with a sound like breathing. I opened the windows to let the air in. It smelled of salt and wild thyme. The box of letters waited on the table, the ribbon now loose, as if it too had begun to relax in my company. I chose one at random this time. It was dated only a few days after the last, the handwriting more hurried, but still graceful. "My heart," it began. "The sea was merciless today. I fear it mirrors my thoughts. They say the lighthouse will close soon. The new machines will guide the ships instead. But no machine will ever know the light I see in you." I pressed the page to my chest before folding it carefully again. Somehow I could hear her voice in those words, steady, brave, a little sad. The same tone I'd once heard in my grandmother's stories when she thought no one was listening. I decided to walk into the village. The tide was low, revealing slick ribbons of seaweed and scattered shells. Children were building towers of stones near the pier, their laughter sharp and bright against the wind. I passed the small cafe that overlooked the harbor. Steam curled in the window, and behind the counter stood the woman from the bakery, dark-haired, that same quiet smile. She looked up as I stepped inside. "Back again already?" She was warm, teasing. I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. The bread didn't last long, or maybe I just needed an excuse to come out. She laughed softly. "Excuses are underrated. Coffee?" I nodded, and she poured it into a chipped blue mug. We talked easily about the weather, the unpredictable post, the way the cliffs seemed to change color depending on the hour. Her name was Rowan. She'd grown up here, left for years, then come back to help her aunt run the cafe. "I miss the sea," she said. "Miss the way it never really lets you leave." Something in her words lingered after I walked home again, the mug's warmth still ghosting my palms. That evening, I found myself reading another letter aloud by the fire, as if sharing it with someone unseen. "Dearest," it said, "they are gone now, the keepers. The lighthouse stands empty. I walked there tonight, and for the first time I lit the lamp myself. It felt like a prayer." I stopped reading. Through the window, the lighthouse beam swept across the sea, slow, faithful, unchanged. I whispered, "She kept it burning. though I wasn't sure whether I meant my grandmother or the woman who wrote the letters. Maybe both.
The days settled into a rhythm. Mornings spent walking the cliffs, afternoons writing in my journal, evenings with the letters. Each one painted a life between lines, hidden picnics under wildflowers, secret touches exchanged in shadow, promises folded away like maps of places that no longer existed. Yet they never ended in despair. Every letter, no matter how heavy the world around it, carried the same quiet hope that love, once spoken, could never truly be silenced. One night, as I sat reading by the window, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, the rain had started again, and Rowan stood there, damp hair clinging to her cheek, holding a paper bag. "You forgot your change," she said, with a grin, though we both knew I hadn't. I stepped aside, letting her in. She smelled of coffee and sea air. "I was just reading," I said, gesturing to the letters scattered on the table. She glanced at them, curiosity flickering behind her eyes. Old love letters? I hesitated, then nodded. Something like that. She smiled softly. Seems like a good night for stories. We sat by the fire while the rain whispered on the windows, the lighthouse beam tracing the room. I read her a passage, one of the gentler ones, about sunlight and rosemary and laughter in the kitchen. Rowan listened in silence, her eyes reflecting the firelight. When I looked up, she was watching me, not the paper. "Beautiful," she said. I couldn't tell whether she meant the words or something else entirely. After she left, I stood at the doorway for a long time, watching the rain blur her figure as she walked back down the path toward the village. Something inside me ached, not in the way grief does, but the way a song aches when it's nearly finished and you don't want it to end. I went back inside, gathered the letters into their box, and whispered "thank you" again, to whom I still didn't know. Outside, the sea answered in its steady voice, the same wordless rhythm it had always spoken.
The rain returned 2 days later, sweeping in from the sea like an old companion. It drummed on the roof and trickled down the window panes, softening the edges of the world until everything outside the glass felt distant and gentle. I had spent the morning sorting through the letters, laying them out by date. The stack was smaller than I'd imagined, perhaps 20 in all, yet it felt like a lifetime pressed into envelopes. Each one carried a piece of someone's heart, folded carefully, sealed against time. By afternoon, the sky darkened to slate. I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and opened the next letter. "My light," it began. "I watched the waves tonight and thought of the way you once traced them on my palm, as if the sea lived beneath my skin. They tell me I must move on, but I cannot. Every shore leads back to you." The words blurred for a moment. I blinked, smiling through the sting in my eyes. The way she wrote, unashamedly tender, it felt like an echo of something inside me I hadn't yet admitted aloud. I thought of Rowan then, her laugh, the quiet way she listened, the easy warmth of her presence. It was strange. We'd met only twice, yet it already felt as if she belonged to the rhythm of this place, to the same quiet pulse that had begun to anchor me. By evening, the rain had deepened to a steady curtain. I lit the lamp, and the room glowed golden. The sea beyond the window was invisible now. Only its voice remained, low, endless, comforting. That was when I heard the knock. It was soft at first, uncertain. When I opened the door, Rowan stood there again, rain dripping from the edge of her hood. She laughed half apologetically. "I swore I don't make a habit of turning up uninvited," she said. "But the power's gone out in the village. Yours too?" I glanced over her shoulder. Darkness stretched down the road, the lighthouse being the only light left moving. "Come in," I said, "before the wind decides otherwise."
Inside, we lit candles, their flames trembling in the draft. She hung her coat by the fire and rubbed her hands together. "Your grandmother used to buy scones from my aunt," she said suddenly. "I remember her. Quiet woman, but she'd always bring a bit of sunshine with her. She used to hum when she thought no one was listening." The memory made my chest tighten. "She loved this place," I said softly. "I think it was her way of breathing." Rowan looked around the cottage, eyes resting on the box of letters. "Is that hers?" "Yes and no. They were written to her." She raised a brow, intrigued. "Love letters?" I nodded. "They're beautiful. Sad, but not broken. They feel alive." Rowan moved closer, the candlelight catching the gold in her eyes. "Then read me one," she said, "if you like." I hesitated only a moment before choosing one near the middle, dated 1955. The paper was brittle but intact. As I read aloud, my voice wove through the sound of rain. "The world will never know how the sea keeps our secret. They would not understand that love can be both rebellion and peace. But here, between tide and sky, we are infinite." When I looked up, Rowan was watching me, expression soft, unreadable. "That's beautiful," she murmured. "They must have been very brave." "They were," I said. And then quieter, "Maybe they still are." The fire had burned low. We sat in the hush that follows a shared secret, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. Outside, the lighthouse beam swept across the window, its slow rhythm painting her face in pale light before it moved on again. When she finally stood to leave, she touched my shoulder lightly. "Come by the cafe tomorrow," she said. "I make a mean lemon cake." I smiled. "Is that another excuse?" "Maybe," she said, her grin returning, "but the good kind." After she left, I stood at the window, watching her disappear into the rain. The light moved across the sea once more, steady and faithful, as if it too had seen this before, the beginning of something that would change everything. I turned back to the table, tracing the edge of the open letter. The ink shimmered faintly in the candlelight, the words like small constellations on paper. And for the first time in months, I felt something stir in me that wasn't ache or loss. It was quieter than joy, gentler than hope, a recognition maybe of how the heart finds its way home again and again. Morning came softly, pale light spilling across the floorboards in ribbons. The storm had passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean. Even the gulls seemed quieter, as if they too were listening to the hush that follows rain. I dressed slowly, my body reluctant to leave the warmth of the blankets. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I noticed the faintest hint of color in my cheeks. The sea air was already claiming me. At the cafe, Rowan stood behind the counter arranging fresh scones on a tray. The smell of lemon and sugar filled the room, mingling with the salt breeze drifting in from the harbor. She looked up when the bell chimed. "Well, you survived the blackout," she said with a smile. "Barely. You forgot to mention how addictive your company is." Her laugh was low and musical, the kind that stays in a room even after it fades. She asked, "Coffee?" "Please." She poured it, then leaned against the counter, eyes curious. "So, how many letters are there?" "About 20. Do they tell a story?" I nodded. Pieces of one. 2 women who loved each other here. One of them might have been my grandmother. Rowan grew thoughtful. "My aunt told me once that the lighthouse used to be run by a woman back in the 50s. Said she kept the lamp burning through a terrible storm when the rest of the coast went dark. People thought she was a myth." Her gaze met mine. Maybe she wasn't.
The words settled between us, gentle as sea mist. For a moment, I could almost see them. 2 silhouettes by the cliffs, a lamp between them, the world asleep while they watched the waves. When I left the cafe, Rowan slipped something into my hand. "A lemon slice," she said. "Payment for the story you'll tell me next time." I promised I would. Back at the cottage, sunlight danced across the table where the letters lay. I opened another, dated months after the last. "My darling Eleanor, the keeper's post has been reassigned. They'll send me north soon, but I cannot leave while your light still burns here. When I look from the cliffs at night, I see it in the window, that small golden glow. If you see my lamp answer yours, you'll know I am still here." My throat tightened. I could picture it. 2 lights, one from the cottage, one from the lighthouse, flashing across the distance like Morse code between hearts. I set the letter down and crossed to the window. Outside, the sea shone silver blue, calm and endless. I found myself whispering, "She never really left, did she?" The days began to fold into each other. Walks along the cliffs, afternoons spent writing, evenings when Rowan stopped by with pastries or stories from the village. Each visit felt both ordinary and extraordinary, the kind of small miracle that doesn't announce itself. Sometimes we'd sit in silence, watching the lighthouse beam drift across the sea. Other nights, we'd talk until the fire burned to embers. She had a way of looking at me that made time stretch, the way it does when you're standing in the surf and the waves pull at your ankles. One evening, she noticed the photograph of my grandmother on the mantel. "She looks kind," Rowan said. She was, I replied. Though now I think she was also brave in ways I never knew. Rowan traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip. Maybe she left you this place so you could find her story and write your own. Her words settled into me like light into water. I didn't answer. I just nodded, because some truths are too tender to disturb. Later that night, after she'd gone, I opened another letter. It was the last one in the stack, dated 1956. The handwriting trembled slightly, as if written in haste or cold. My love, the light will go out soon. They are closing the station. But I have hidden our letters in the place that first held your laughter. The small room behind the kitchen, under the shelf where you used to store the tea. Perhaps one day, someone will find them and know that we were real. I closed my eyes, the weight of the moment pressing softly against me. They had written for me, somehow, across decades, across silence, trusting the sea to deliver their truth. I whispered into the quiet, I found them. And for the briefest second, I thought I heard an answering sigh, like a wave retreating over sand. The morning was bright enough to make the sea glitter like scattered glass. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries cutting through the quiet air. For the first time since I'd arrived, the wind felt warm on my face. Rowan met me halfway along the cliff path, a thermos in one hand, her smile in full sunlight. Thought you might be heading this way, she said. I held up the lighthouse keys that the local council had left with the cottage. These said I could have a look inside, as long as I promised not to fall in love with it. Too late for that, she said softly. We walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the sea below shifting from deep green to steel blue. When the path turned upward, the lighthouse rose above us, tall, white, its paint cracked by years of salt and wind. Its door creaked like an old throat when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of oil and rust. Our footsteps echoed up the spiral stairs. Halfway up, a narrow window framed the sea in perfect miniature, endless and shining. At the top, the lantern room glowed with reflected light. I ran my fingers over the glass panes. I think that's where they would have stood, I whispered. Rowan leaned on the rail beside me. Your grandmother and the woman from the letters. Yes. I took a breath, then told her what the last letter had said, about the hidden box, about the promise that someone would find it. She listened without interrupting, her gaze steady on the horizon. When I finished, she said, "Then maybe you were meant to." We stayed there a long time. Below us, waves folded and unfolded like slow breaths. The beam still turned, though now automated, sweeping the coastline with patient devotion. Every rotation felt like a heartbeat of light. I turned to her. Do you ever think places remember us? I think they remember feelings, she said. The laughter, the fear, the love. Maybe that's why we keep coming back. To feel what they still hold. Something in me unclenched at her words. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding on to grief, to guilt, to all the things I never said to the woman who'd raised me. For the first time, the ache felt like part of something larger, something still alive. When we finally descended, the sun was beginning to dip. The sky brushed with rose and gold. At the base of the lighthouse, a cluster of wildflowers bent in the wind. Rowan crouched to pick one, a small sprig of sea lavender, and tucked it into my hand. "With letters," she said. We walked back toward the village, our shoulders occasionally brushing. Every touch felt like a line from a poem I hadn't finished reading. That evening, after she left, I sat by the fire and read through the letters once more. Each one was a bridge between two women who had loved quietly and the life I was slowly stepping into. Their courage had been in their tenderness and daring to write my love when the world refused to hear it. Outside, the beam turned again, steady as always. For the first time, I didn't just watch it. I answered. I lit a candle in the window, its small flame flickering against the glass. As the light swept past, it caught the candle for an instant. Two lights greeting each other across time. And in that moment, I felt them both beside me. My grandmother and the woman she had loved, smiling, free, their story no longer hidden. The sea whispered its endless lullaby against the rocks. And somewhere within that rhythm, I heard Rowan's laughter carried on the wind. I knew then that the story wasn't finished. It had simply changed hands. The wind had dropped by morning. A thin mist curled along the cliffs, turning the world soft and silver. I walked to the cafe as I always did, candlelight and courage still lingering in me like warmth after fire. Rowan was setting chairs outside, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled by the sea breeze. When she saw me, she smiled, that small, steady smile that always seemed to reach her eyes first. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I answered, but the word came out quieter than I meant it to. She poured coffee for both of us, then leaned against the doorway. "You look different," she said. "How so?" "Like you finally slept." I laughed softly. Maybe I did. We drank in silence for a while, watching a boat disappear into the haze. I told her about the candle in the window, about how the beam had passed and caught it. She listened with that same calm focus, the kind that feels like being seen completely. "They'd be happy," she said at last, "knowing their light still reaches someone. Maybe it reached us both." Her hand brushed mine on the table, just a light touch, but enough to still the air around us. Outside, the gulls cried overhead, distant and bright. "Would you like to see the cottage again?" I asked suddenly. She looked surprised, then nodded. "I'd like that." Back at the cottage, the afternoon light fell through the windows in long golden bands. The box of letters still sat on the table, the ribbon now faded from sea glass green to soft gray. Rowan reached out and traced the edges of one envelope. "They were brave," she said again. "It couldn't have been easy." "No, but maybe it was simple. Just two people finding each other." She looked at me then, really looked, and I felt it, that stillness before something changes forever. The sea murmured outside, patient and knowing. I took a breath. When I read their words, it felt like they were telling me not to be afraid of loving again. Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. "And are you?" I shook my head. "Not anymore." The space between us closed like a sigh. Her lips met mine softly, no rush, no surprise, just the quiet recognition of something already written. Outside, a wave broke against the rocks, its rhythm matching the beat of my heart. When we parted, the world felt both brand new and very old. She smiled, cheeks flashed. For the record, that's a better reason to visit than returning forgotten change. I laughed, the sound light and free in the air. The cottage seemed to breathe with us, the wood settling, the kettle humming faintly on the stove. Later, as the sun began to set, we walked to the cliff edge. The lighthouse beam turned once more, stretching its path across the water. I reached for Rowan's hand, and she didn't let go. She said, "I think they'd like this. I think they'd call it full circle." We stood there until the stars began to appear, one by one above the darkening sea. Somewhere far below, the tide shifted softly, pulling at the shore. In the fading light, the candles still burned in the cottage window, a small, unwavering glow. The letters remained on the table inside, their story complete, yet somehow still living in ours. Love, I realized, was never about time. It was about light, the kind you carry forward, the kind that finds you even after the storm. As we turned to walk back, Rowan squeezed my hand. She said, "Come on, before the tide steals the path." I smiled. "Let it try." We laughed, the sound carried out over the waves, two voices joining the echo of those who'd come before. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at home. This sea keeps many secrets, but love was never one of them. Good night.